Sometime in the middle of the 12th century, a knight steps off a ship at a harbor on the coast of the Holy Land. He has come from the west to fight for the cross, and his head is full of the stories. The miracle at Antioch, the storming of Jerusalem, a war of the faithful against the infidel at the edge of the world. He expects a grim frontier fort, a garrison huddled behind its walls, surrounded, besieged, holy and afraid. And then he actually looks around. What he sees does not fit the story at all. He sees Frankish lords, the sons and grandsons of the first Crusaders, sitting cross-legged on carpets in cool stone houses. They wear flowing silks over their mail. They eat spiced Eastern food and employ Muslim doctors and Syrian cooks. Some of them speak Arabic. Their wives are local women. Out in the streets, Christian and Muslim merchants haggle over the same stalls, and just up the road a Frankish baron is sharing a friendly, joking dinner with the Muslim emir from the next valley, a man he fought last year and may fight again next year, and who is, in between, something very close to a friend. To the newcomer, fresh off the boat and still burning with holy war, this looks like something between a paradise and a betrayal. To the people living it, it was just the truth of the place. They had won the impossible, and then they had to do the far stranger thing. They had to live here. Welcome back to History with Roarman. This is episode 3 of our 6-part series on the Crusades. Last time, against every reasonable expectation, the First Crusade reached its impossible goal and took Jerusalem in the summer of 1099. And it ended on a warning. Taking the holy city had been the miracle. Holding it would be the nightmare. This episode is about the 80 years in between. It's the story of the strange little world the Crusaders built out here, a chain of Christian states clinging to the coast of the Levant, 1,000 miles from home. They called it, simply, Outremer, an old French word meaning the land beyond the sea. This is how they built it, how they held it, how they surprised everyone, including themselves, by learning to live in it, and how, slowly, out in the east, the divided Muslim world that had let them win in the first place began, at last, to pull itself together. Let's get into it. Start with the map, because the map tells you almost everything. What the Crusaders held was not a country. It was a thin ribbon of coastline, a Christian smear pressed up against the edge of a vast Muslim sea, hundreds of miles long and, in most places, barely a few days' ride deep. Behind them was the water and the road home. In front of them, in every direction inland, was a world that was not going to stay beaten. Along that ribbon they organized 4 states. In the far north, the most exposed and the most fragile, was the county of Edessa, reaching deep inland with no coastline at all, a finger poked straight into hostile country. Below it sat the Principality of Antioch, wrapped around that great city they had nearly died taking. Further south, the last of the 4 to be founded in 1109, was the county of Tripoli. And the jewel of the whole thing, the reason any of them were here, was the kingdom of Jerusalem in the south, holding the holy city itself. That kingdom needed a king, and getting one was its own small drama. Godfrey of Bouillon, the devout lord who had taken charge after the conquest, the man who refused to wear a crown of gold where Christ had worn thorns, died in the summer of 1100, only a year after the victory. His brother Baldwin had no such holy scruples. Baldwin came down from Edessa, took the throne, and had himself crowned in Bethlehem at Christmas of 1100 as Baldwin the First, the first true king of Jerusalem. He was hard, ambitious, and very capable, and over the next 18 years he did the unglamorous essential work. He took the port cities along the coast one by one so the ships could land, and he turned a lucky conquest into something that could actually function as a kingdom. But functioning meant facing one enormous, permanent problem. There were never enough of them. Think about the arithmetic. The First Crusade had been a flood, tens of thousands of armed men. But once Jerusalem was won, most of them did the obvious thing. They had taken their vow, they had prayed at the Holy Sepulchre, and they went home. What was left behind to actually hold Outremer was a scatter of a few thousand fighting men, defending a frontier hundreds of miles long, against a surrounding population that vastly outnumbered them. Every knight who died was almost impossible to replace. Every reinforcement had to come by ship, across the whole Mediterranean, from a Europe that cheered for the Holy Land but mostly stayed in it. So how do a few thousand men hold a border that long? The Crusaders came up with two answers, and the first of them still stands today. Stone. If you cannot fill a frontier with soldiers, you fill it with castles. All across Outremer, the Crusaders raised some of the mightiest fortresses the medieval world would ever see. Huge concentric rings of pale stone set on the high ground, watching the roads and the passes. The greatest of them, Krak de Chevaliers, could hold a garrison for years and shrug off armies. These castles were force multipliers. A handful of men behind those walls could dominate a whole region, blunt an invasion, and by the one thing the kingdom never had enough of, which was time. The second answer was even more original. If you don't have a standing army, you invent one, and you make it holy. This is one of the strangest and most influential things the Crusades ever produced. The warrior monks. It began, humbly enough, with the roads. Pilgrims were still pouring into the Holy Land, unarmed and defenseless, and they were being robbed and killed on the dangerous route up from the coast to Jerusalem. So around the year 1119, a small band of knights took monastic vows, poverty, chastity, obedience, and swore to protect those pilgrims with their swords. They were given quarters on the Temple Mount, on the site of what was believed to be Solomon's temple, and from that they took their name, the Knights of the Temple. The Templars. Sit with how odd that idea is. A monk was a man who had renounced the world and its violence to pray. A knight was a man of war. The Templars were both at once, monks who killed, holy warriors bound by a monastic rule, and to many people at the time it sounded like a contradiction in terms. But it fused the two great obsessions of the age, deep religious devotion and organized violence, into one white-hot instrument. In 1129, at the Council of Troyes, the order got the church's full blessing and a formal rule, championed by the most influential churchman in Europe, Bernard of Clairvaux, who wrote a ringing defense of these new Knights of Christ. Their famous look, the white mantle, and later the blood-red cross upon it, comes from these years. A second order grew up alongside them out of a hospital in Jerusalem that cared for sick pilgrims, and militarized in turn, the Hospitallers in their black mantles with a white cross. Together these orders became the closest thing Outremer had to a permanent, professional, disciplined army. They garrisoned the great castles. They were the hard steel core of the kingdom's defense. And they answered not to the local king, but to the Pope. So that was how they held it. Stone and holy steel, and a thin trickle of new arrivals. But the real surprise of Outremer, the thing that would have scandalized the men who preached the crusade back in Europe, was how the people actually lived once the fighting paused. Because they adapted. The Franks who were born out here, a second and third generation the newcomers sneeringly called Polanes, were not the wild holy warriors of 1099. They were colonists who had made a home. They dressed for the climate in light Eastern robes. They developed a taste for the food, the bathhouses, the medicine, the comforts of a far more sophisticated civilization than the one their grandfathers had left. And crucially, they had to share the land with the people already on it. Far more numerous local Muslims and Eastern Christians and Jews who worked the fields, filled the markets, and could not simply be wished away. What grew up was not tolerance in our modern sense. Nobody here believed in equality of religions. The Muslim peasant paid his tax and knew his place. But it was something arguably more remarkable because it was real, a functioning, pragmatic, multi-faith society. Muslim farmers worked under Frankish lords and kept their faith. Trade boomed, and the great Italian merchant cities, Venice, Genoa, and Pisa, won their own quarters in the bustling ports, shipping the silks and spices of the East back to a hungry Europe and growing fantastically rich doing it. Day to day, across most of Outremer, Christian and Muslim simply got on with the business of living next to each other. We even have a witness to it, and he's wonderful. Usama ibn Munqidh was a cultured Syrian Muslim nobleman who spent years dealing with the Franks, and he wrote about them with the amused, superior eye of a sophisticated man watching charming barbarians. He tells of Templars he counted as friends, who would clear a space for him to pray. He's baffled and appalled by Frankish medicine and Frankish justice. He thinks they're crude and brave and jealous about entirely the wrong things. It is not the voice of an existential holy war. It is the voice of a man describing his slightly ridiculous neighbors. That too was Outremer. But hold on to why any of this was possible in the first place, because it's the key to everything that follows. The Crusaders had won, and the Crusaders were surviving for one underlying reason. The Muslim world around them was divided, splintered among rival emirs and cities and sects, Turk against Arab, Sunni against Shia, each local ruler more worried about his neighbor than about the strange Frankish states on the coast. A united Muslim Near East could have thrown the Crusaders into the sea in a season. A divided one learned, grudgingly, to live with them, and that division was about to start closing. Slowly, and then not so slowly, the Muslim world began to wake up. The first man to really shake it awake was a Turkish warlord named Zengi, the Atabeg, the governing strongman of Mosul and then Aleppo. Zengi was brutal, feared even by his own side, a ruthless empire builder who spent most of his energy fighting other Muslim rulers to weld the fractured cities of the region under his own hard fist. But he also began, for the first time in a serious way, to wrap that ambition in the language of jihad, of holy war to drive the Franks out. And in 1144, Zengi turned on the weakest and most exposed of the four Crusader states. He marched on Edessa. Edessa was the oldest of the Crusader states, the very first one, founded back in 1098. It was also the most vulnerable, out on its own inland, its count away, its defenses thin. Zengi besieged it and, at the end of December 1144, he took it. The city fell and the county of Edessa began to collapse. It's worth pausing on that quietly because it was a genuine shock. For nearly 50 years, the tide had only ever run one way. The Franks won, held, expanded. Now, for the first time, one of their four states had been wiped off the map. The news went through Christendom like cold water. If Edessa could fall, the unspoken thought ran, then so one day could Jerusalem. Europe's answer was the Second Crusade. And this time, it was not just landless knights and younger sons who took the cross. It was kings. Louis VII of France and Conrad III of Germany, two of the most powerful monarchs in the West, led enormous armies east, whipped into holy fervor by the preaching of that same Bernard of Clairvaux, whose word could move all of Christendom. On paper, it should have dwarfed the achievement of the First Crusade. In practice, it was a humiliating disaster from almost the first step. The great armies were savaged crossing Anatolia, worn down by the Turks and the terrain until only a fraction reached the Holy Land, kings arriving with the wreckage of their hosts. And then, having come all that way, the leaders made a decision that historians have shaken their heads at ever since. They did not march to retake Edessa, the whole reason the crusade had been called. Instead, in July of 1148, they laid siege to Damascus, a wealthy Muslim city that happened, at that very moment, to be one of the few Muslim powers actually hostile to Zengi's family and therefore a natural potential ally of the Christians. They attacked the one neighbor they might have kept friendly. And they failed. The siege of Damascus collapsed in humiliation in just 4 days. The kings went home. The Second Crusade simply fell apart, achieving precisely nothing, except to make the mighty West look weak, and to push Damascus straight into the arms of the enemy. On the Muslim side, confidence surged. The Franks, it turned out, could be beaten badly. Zengi himself did not live to enjoy the reckoning. He was murdered by a servant in 1146, before the Second Crusade even arrived. But his cause did not die with him. It passed to his son, and the son was, in every way that mattered, more dangerous than the father. His name was Nur ad-Din. Where Zengi had been a brutal opportunist who used holy war as a tool, Nur ad-Din seems to have truly believed it. He was famously pious, disciplined and just, a ruler who patronized scholars, built mosques and schools, and made the jihad against the Franks the organizing purpose of his reign. And he was patient. Piece by piece, he did what no one had managed before. He united Muslim Syria under a single authority. In 1154 he took Damascus, the very city the Second Crusade had thrown away, without a fight, welcomed in by its own people. Now Aleppo and Damascus, the north and the south of Syria, answered to one man, and that man had wrapped the Crusader states in an unbroken arc of hostile territory and dedicated his life to their destruction. The vice was tightening, and then the last piece of the puzzle came into play, and it lay to the south, Egypt. Egypt was the great prize, ruled by the Fatimids, a Shia dynasty now old and decaying and torn by court intrigue. It was fabulously rich, the wealthiest land in the region, and militarily hollow, ripe for the taking. Both sides could see it. Whoever controlled Egypt would tip the whole balance of the war. So through the 1160s, the Kingdom of Jerusalem and Nur ad-Din played out a strange, tangled contest, each sending armies down into Egypt, each trying to control the Fatimid court, each terrified the other would get there first. Nur ad-Din's man in this contest was a tough Kurdish general named Shirkuh, and Shirkuh brought with him, on campaign, his young nephew, a junior officer in his 20s who by all accounts would rather have stayed home. The nephew's name was Yusuf, but history would know him by his title of honor, Salah ad-Din, the righteousness of the faith, in the west, Saladin. The Egyptian campaigns went back and forth, but in the end the men of Nur ad-Din won the race. Shirkuh outmaneuvered the Franks and made himself master of Egypt as the Fatimid vizier, the real power behind the failing throne. And then, abruptly, in 1169 Shirkuh died, just weeks into his triumph. The Fatimid caliph, looking for someone young and pliable he could control, reached past the senior commanders and appointed the quiet nephew in his place. It would prove to be one of the great miscalculations in history. In 1169, Saladin became vizier of Egypt. He turned out to be neither quiet nor pliable. Saladin took hold of Egypt with a firm and skillful grip, and in 1171 he made the decisive move. He abolished the Shia Fatimid Caliphate entirely and returned Egypt to the Sunni fold, to the mainstream of the Muslim world that Nur ad-Din championed. At a stroke, the old religious split that had divided the region for 2 centuries, Sunni against Shia, Egypt against Syria, began to close. And for the very first time, the possibility that had always been. The Crusaders' deepest nightmare came into view. One man, one cause, holding both Egypt and Syria, north and south, closing like a ring around the Kingdom of Jerusalem. There was, for the moment, one thing holding it back, and that was the awkward fact that Saladin, master of Egypt, was still technically the servant of Nur ad-Din, master of Syria, and the two men, both ambitious, had begun to eye each other with a wary, unspoken rivalry. As long as they were divided, the Crusaders had a little room to breathe. That room ran out in 1174. In that year, Nur ad-Din died, and into the space he left stepped Saladin, moving to gather the whole inheritance, Egypt and Syria together, into his own hands. The very thing the Franks had feared for 80 years, a single strong leader uniting the Muslim world in earnest against them, was finally, unmistakably, happening. The nightmare promised at the fall of Jerusalem was taking shape, and it had a name. For 80 years, a few thousand Christians had held on to the impossible, on land that was never really theirs, and they had done it only because the enemy was divided. Now the enemy was uniting, and at the same moment, the Kingdom of Jerusalem itself was sliding toward a terrible inner weakness. A boy king dying slowly of leprosy, and a nest of proud, quarreling barons already circling the throne he would leave behind. The two sides were riding, without quite knowing it yet, toward a single catastrophic collision in the desert heat, at a place with two low hills called the Horns of Hattin. That is where we go next time in Episode 4. The rise of Saladin, the fever and folly of the Crusader kingdom in its last days, and the day in 1187 when it all came crashing down. If you're enjoying the series, subscribe and I'll see you there.